Momentarily, but let's hear from Downing Street.
Of the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, the UK's independent regulator for medicines, vaccines and medical devices. May I first introduce the colleagues who are with me this morning. On my left is Professor Sir Munir Pirmohamed, Professor of Medicine at Liverpool University and Chair of the CHM's Expert Working Group on COVID-19 vaccines. That's the Commission on Human Medicines, the government's independent advisory body. And Sir Munir will provide more detail on his work shortly. On my right is Professor Wei Shen Lim, Professor of Respiratory Medicine at Nottingham University and Chair of the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, subgroup which has been preparing advice on COVID-19 vaccines. This briefing has been called to announce that the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency has this week recommended to the UK government, on the basis of the advice of the Commission on Human Medicines, that it should agree to the approval for use of the COVID-19 vaccine developed by Pfizer-BioNTech, together with the conditions for its supply and use. The MHRA's recommendation has been reached following an extremely thorough and scientifically rigorous review of all the evidence of safety, of effectiveness and of quality of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. The UK government has now accepted this advice and has made the decision to approve the vaccine for use with some conditions in adults aged 16 and over. The safety of the public will always come first. And I emphasise again that this recommendation has only been given by the MHRA following the most rigorous scientific assessment of every piece of data, so that it meets the required strict standards of safety, of effectiveness and of quality. We have 2 or 3 slides this morning to help our discussion get moving. And in the first one, you can see that unlike the usual pattern of clinical trials, which are done one after another, the development of this vaccine has been adapted so that the trials are overlapping and the next one can start before a particular phase has finished. And in this way, we have been able to progress development in the shortest time possible. On the next slide, you can see how the MHRA has worked, and I would like to tell you a little more about this just now. It's been done using a process known as a rolling review. A rolling review can be used to complete the assessment of a promising medicine or a vaccine in a situation where time is of the essence, in the shortest time possible. But, and this is a very important point indeed, that doesn't mean that any corners have been cut, none at all. So looking for the top downwards, the expert working group started in the middle of the year to look at how safety surveillance would be in place to give us the highest possible level of assurance of the safety of the COVID-19 vaccine. And that preparation and planning has been done with meticulous care. Similarly, our National Institute for Biological Standards and Control have been working independently on testing batch by batch the quality of the vaccine. Then in October, clinical analysis data became available. That's the 3rd bar down, followed by the interim analysis on the 10th of November. The quality analysis came very shortly after that, and most recently, the batch testing has begun, with a final analysis at the very end of the process. So it's very clear that separate teams have been working in parallel to deliver the most rigorous review of this vaccine. No corners have been cut. Our expert scientists and clinicians have worked round the clock, carefully, methodically, poring over tables and analyses and graphs on every single piece of data, hundreds, over 1,000 pages of data, and absolutely critically analysing the preclinical evidence, the clinical trials, the manufacturing and quality controls, and then down to the final sampling. We've also reviewed and agreed the prescribing information so that the public and healthcare professionals are very clear and can be very confident that the vaccine is being used in the correct way, understanding what's involved. And going forward from today, our National Institute for Biological Standards and Control will be independently laboratory testing so that every single vaccine that goes out meets the same high standards of safety and quality. And we've benefited from a further safety step too. Following our thorough review of the data at the MHRA, we have sought the advice of the government's independent body, the Commission on Human Medicines. And I'd now like to turn to Professor Sir Munir to explain the pivotal part its independent members have played in critically assessing every piece of evidence. Munir.
Thank you very much, June. So I chaired the CHM's expert working group. And first of all, I'd like to thank the members of the expert working group who worked with me tirelessly with over 40 hours of face-to-face, on Zoom at least, committee work and additional reading time. We made recommendations to the Commission on Human Medicines, and then undertook an independent review, and the Commission on Human Medicines is chaired by Professor Stuart Ralston. We had a wide variety of experts on both groups, including people who were experts in viral diseases, immunologists, epidemiologists who look at disease patterns, clinical pharmacologists, and toxicologists who are experts in various aspects of medicines. We looked at all sorts of data which was available to us, including raw data, unprecedented access to raw data. And this allowed us to look at the overall risk-benefit analysis. We look at risk-benefit analysis for every compound that comes through in terms of licensing, and we use the same stringent standards to be able to look at the risk-benefit of this particular vaccine. We looked at laboratory data, we looked at the manufacturing processes and the quality data, as well as the clinical trial data. From this, we came to the conclusion that there was overwhelming benefit for this particular vaccine, and therefore recommended to the MHRA that its use should be authorized. I just want to say a few things about the effectiveness of this vaccine. The data show that this vaccine is 95% effective. It is effective in all the groups that were given the vaccine within the trial, irrespective of age, sex, race, or country that they lived in. We've also looked at the safety of this. The safety of the vaccine is similar to other vaccines, and most of the side effects are very mild and usually last for a day or so. We've been very careful to look at the quality of the vaccine, particularly given the need for storing the vaccine at ultra-low temperatures. And we had visits from NHS colleagues to tell us what the deployment strategies were, and we were able to advise them as well on the stability issues that may be important for deployment. It's important to note that what we have got is data relating to the vaccine up to this point. It is important that we undertake surveillance following the use of vaccines in the population. And we were very keen to recommend that the MHRA undertakes active surveillance of the vaccine after it is used. And this includes the use of yellow cards, as well as a special active monitoring program, which we will be inviting people to join. The committee also considered that no specific precautions were required on administration of this vaccine in people who already have had COVID-19, and no testing is required before receiving the vaccine. Thank you, June.
Thank you, Sir Munir. Now I'll turn to Professor Lim Wei Shen to tell us about the work of the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation.
Thank you, June. The Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunization is an independent scientific advisory body. We advise the Secretary of State on the provision of vaccination and immunization services. As a committee, we've been meeting regularly over the last few months. We've done that to appraise new and emerging scientific evidence related to our role. On the slide, you will see the types of information that we've been assessing. These include data on vaccine safety and efficacy, but also how COVID-19 has impacted the UK. This includes impacts of COVID-19 in care homes, on people from different ethnic groups, as well as people in different occupations. The data have come from primary care, from Public Health England, and from hospitals. We've also looked at mathematical models that have helped us to understand how different vaccine strategies might be used. The UK is fortunate in that we have one of the best immunization programs in the world. Every year, through the infant, childhood, and adult vaccination programs, millions of us are protected from serious disease. All of that expertise also informs JCVI's decision-making. For the first phase of the pandemic and its vaccination program, we are suggesting that vaccines are offered in order to protect people who are most at risk of dying from COVID-19, as well as to protect health and social care services, because by doing so, we also protect lives. The advice is divided into two main parts. The first is to offer vaccination according to the estimated risk of dying from COVID-19. The risk of dying from COVID-19 is very strongly associated with age. Age is by far the single most important factor in terms of risk from COVID-19. The second strand to the advice is regarding implementation of the vaccination program. And we advise that due attention is paid locally to mitigating health inequalities. I'll say more of that in a moment. On the next slide, you will see the prioritization order in terms of the offer of vaccination. Residents in care homes for older adults and care home workers are the highest priority. Following that are those 80 years of age and above, alongside frontline healthcare and social care workers. Then come those 75 years of age and above, followed by those 70 years of age and above, alongside people who are clinically extremely vulnerable because of specific health conditions. They're followed by people who are aged 65 years and above, and then individuals who are aged 16 to 64 years with underlying health conditions that also put them at risk of COVID-19, but where those conditions are not already represented in the conditions putting somebody at clinically extremely vulnerable risk. The prioritization order then continues down the age groups until all those aged 50 years and above are included. This is phase one of the program. In phase one, we hope that 90 to 99% of people who are at risk of dying from COVID-19 will be included or covered. The next part of the advice relates to implementation of the program. We advise that local NHS providers, local public health teams, and local leaders work together to address community needs and local needs. We suggest that community teams work together to mitigate against health inequalities that might occur in relation to ethnicity, deprivation, or access to health care. We also recognize that there may be operational reasons why the prioritization needs to be more flexible, and this may relate to vaccine characteristics or vaccine supply or exceptional personal circumstances. Overall, we have good news today. We have a vaccine that is acceptably safe and effective. Good vaccine uptake will save lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Lim. Let's now turn to questions from the media. And our first question comes from Fergus Walsh of the BBC.
Oh, right. Thanks very much. Question for Dr. June Raine. How can you reassure the public that they can have absolute confidence in this vaccine, given how quickly you've approved it? And for Professor Wei-Shen Lim, can you just sum up for me the reasoning behind your list of priorities about who gets the vaccine first?
Thank you. A really important point relates to the thorough work, scientifically rigorous, methodologically sound that the agency has done. And the way of working in a rolling review ensures that our teams of clinicians and scientists are working in parallel to complete all the work according to strict guidelines on safety, effectiveness and quality is complete. This vaccine has only been approved because those strict tests have been done and complied with. And everyone can be absolutely confident that no corners whatsoever have been cut. Perhaps if I could think of an analogy, if you're climbing a mountain, you prepare and prepare. We started that in June. By the time the interim results became available on the 10th of November, we were at base camp. And then, when we got the final analysis, we were ready for that last sprint that takes us to today. And that is the exemplary nature of the work that's been done, and the public deserve nothing less. I'll hand to Professor Lim now.
Thank you. So in relation to the offer of vaccination, prioritization was based on the risk of dying from COVID-19, and in order to protect the most vulnerable, we have prioritized the most vulnerable individuals first. The other element is protection of the NHS, the health and social care system, because by protecting the NHS, we also protect lives.
Thank you.
Thank you. We now turn to Victoria MacDonald from Channel 4. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much. Can you explain for me why the MHRA has been able to authorise this vaccine so much faster than the European Medicines Agency and the Food and Drug Administration? Is there any difference in the levels of evidence that was submitted or the checks required? And secondly, how long is the lag, or is there a lag, between being given the vaccine and for it to become effective?
Thank you. I'll take the first question and then turn to Sir Munir. The way in which the MHRA has worked is equivalent to all international standards. We are well aware of our national situation, and therefore we have mounted teams, built our capability and worked in parallel. And I want to thank the colleagues who've worked day and night, weekends, to enable us to come to this position. The public can be absolutely confident that the standards we have worked to are equivalent to those around the world. Sir Munir.
The vaccine requires 2 doses, 21 days apart. And from the data that's been presented to us, people will be immune 7 days after the second dose. A partial immunity does occur after the first dose, and we can see some protection occurring after day 12 of the first dose, but the best immunity is 7 days after the second dose.
There will, of course, be longer-term follow-up to provide further reassurance from the data, the robust data we already have. Our next question comes from Emily Morgan of ITV. Good morning.
Hello, good morning. My first question is to you, Dr. Raine. This is a pretty historic moment. You've approved this vaccine in record time. I just wondered how much of a momentous moment this is for you and indeed for science. And then a question to Professor Lim. This is on the priority list. Can you confirm that care home residents will indeed still be the first to receive this vaccine, given how unstable it is and tricky to move to care homes and care home residents, or indeed will NHS staff actually, in fact, be the first to receive it?
Thank you. I'll take the first question, if I may. The reason we're here today is the brilliance of science and also the altruism of all those people who have enlisted in clinical trials to give us the tremendously robust data we have today. And thirdly, it's due to the agility, commitment, and extremely high scientific standards of all the staff at the MHRA who've worked on this, and the privilege of having an expert advisory outreach, our Commission on Human Medicines and its expert group chaired by Sir Munir. So it is the culmination of all these things that the UK is able to bring together and to look always to the public for whom this is for. Professor Lim.
Thank you. The JCVI's advice is aimed at maximising benefit from vaccines, and therefore it's aimed at the most vulnerable people, which are people in care homes. Whether or not the vaccine itself can be delivered to care homes is obviously an important point, and there will be some flexibility in terms of operational constraints. The JCVI's advice is that every effort should be made to supply vaccine and offer vaccinations to care home residents. Whether or not that is actually doable is dependent on deployment and implementation.
Thank you. I wonder if, Sir Munir, you would like to add, because clearly while the responsibility of the MHRA relates to the standards of science, we also look at it in the context of the real world, which is what Professor Lim has described. Sir Munir.
Yeah, so we did obviously look at the stability of the vaccine. As you said, it is stored at minus 70 degrees, but we were able to look at stability data, and the stability data is showing that it is stable for a short period of time at 2 to 8 degrees, which allows it to be transported to the relevant vaccination sites.
Thank you. Let's now turn to the next question, which comes from Gordon Rayner of the Daily Telegraph.
Thank you. Can I ask, have you identified when? Do you know when the first vaccine will be delivered? Which day we can expect that? Have you identified the first person who's going to get it? And if not, how are you going to decide who that person will be? Will the highest risk tiers be given priority, so that the tier 3 areas with the highest incidence? And also, can I ask whether you know whether economic decisions have been factored in, i.e. when you get down the list of priorities, will people who can't work from home get the vaccine before people who can work from home?
These are helpful points that everyone wants to know, and I know my colleagues in the Department of Health and Social Care are working again tirelessly to make sure that the first vaccine will be delivered as soon as all the checks are completed. I can speak for the National Institute for Biological Standards and Control, who are ready to complete their checks on the first batch. So everything is being looked at 24/7 to enable this important public health step to be put in place as soon as possible, not a minute wasted. Dr. Lim, would you like to talk a bit more about your perspective on this?
As far as I understand, the NHS is working hard to deliver the vaccines as soon as possible. But that is not within the remit of JCVI to impose any time limits on vaccine delivery.
Bear in mind, too, that many thousands have already had the vaccine as part of clinical trials. So there is a continuum here, and our knowledge of benefits increases over time. So perhaps it will seem to be a historic moment when the first person, after the approval of supply, has their vaccine. But, Sir Munir, we see this very much as an ongoing process.
Absolutely. So it is very much an ongoing process with regard to this vaccine and future vaccines coming through in order to be able to make sure the relevant people in the JCVI list are given the vaccine in the priority order that was shown.
This is a good point for me to stress that we will be inviting members of the public to join us in an active monitoring programme, and many will get a letter It'll be by random allocation, inviting them to join this. So please help us to continue to build that body of knowledge about this important vaccine.
Could I just ask the point about whether the highest risk tiers are the ones which will get it first?
Professor Lim?
That is the intention of the prioritisation order, is that the most vulnerable people are offered the vaccination first.
Thank you.
In tier 3?
Sorry.
In tier 3?
You mean regional tiers? Our prioritisation order is not dependent on which tier somebody is in. It is a national prioritisation order.
Thank you. That's very clear. Let's turn to the next question. Andy Woodcock from The Independent. Good morning.
Good morning. A couple of things. We appear to be getting authorisation for this vaccine ahead of our friends in Europe. I was just wondering, does the fact that the UK is no longer part of the EU, did that make any difference to the speed with which you were able to complete your authorisation? And secondly, as I understand it, the vaccine which you've authorised, we haven't ordered sufficient quantities to cover the whole of the population. I was wondering, do we have enough of this vaccine to get through all of the priority groups which you listed earlier on, or would we be dependent on waiting for further vaccines to be authorised in order to get to the position where the whole country can be safe from this disease?
We have been able to authorise the supply of this vaccine using provisions under European law which exist until the 1st of January. So our speed or our progress has been totally dependent on the availability of data in our rolling review and the rigorous assessment and independent advice we have received. So I hope that clarifies the point about the European relationship. Let's turn to Professor Lim around availability. Is there anything you'd like to add on this?
Yes, so it's a very good question about vaccine supply and availability. The whole reason why a priority listing is required is because we expect during a pandemic that vaccine supply will be limited in the first instance. And so vaccines should be offered in the first instance to the most vulnerable moving down the priority list. We will need as many vaccines as we can get, not just in the UK, but globally. And this includes more than one vaccine type in order to reach all the people who are at risk from COVID-19. So this is the start of a program and not the end of a program.
And we are absolutely in liaison with colleagues in the Department of Health and Social Care in terms of all the evidence that we have to enable them to do their job to make sure availability is assured. Let's now turn to the next question from Chris Musson of Scottish Sun. Good morning.
Morning, everybody. Can I just check, what would your message be, your simple message to people who are sceptical about vaccine safety, particularly in light of some of the anti-vax misinformation that we're seeing spreading on social media? And can I check also, you're obviously going through a similar process with other prospective vaccines. Can you just summarise which ones and what are the timescales, the expected timescales for approval on those other vaccines? Thank you.
The public can be absolutely confident that every rigorous check has been done to reach the judgment that we reached, that the benefits far outweigh any risk, that the safety of the vaccine has been scrutinised independently by our Commission on Human Medicines and no stone has been left unturned. So absolute confidence in the safety, effectiveness and quality of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. In terms of further products, vaccines for COVID-19 that are coming through, there are two, you'll be aware, for which we have further rolling reviews ongoing, and those will be conducted to the absolute scientific standards that the public would expect. So, Munir, do you have anything to add on this?
No, thanks.
Let's turn.
Have you any indication on the timescales there for the other vaccine approvals?
It wouldn't be possible to predict today, simply that this rigorous process has started in the way that I've described, with every package or parcel of data as it's available being scrutinised. And my guess is, Sir Munir, your expert group is going to be working probably over Christmas to make sure that we complete our work in the shortest possible time. Thank you. Let's turn to Tom Colson from Business Insider.
Good morning. The Health Secretary has said that rolling out a vaccine will be challenging because it needs to be stored at very low temperatures. Do you foresee, Professor Lim, potential challenges in offering the Pfizer vaccine to vulnerable groups who might not be able to travel to a vaccination centre or whose GP surgery might not have the cold storage facilities necessary to store the vaccine?
Yes, indeed. I think every vaccine that comes through will probably have its own characteristics in terms of storage, transport, and deliverability. So the Pfizer vaccine in particular has a strong requirement for very cold storage, and there are stability issues potentially that constrain how a vaccine can be supplied to different people. Let's not forget that a mass vaccination program, as will be conducted very soon, is an unprecedented thing. It will be the largest vaccination program in the UK for decades. So there will be all manner of operational flexibilities that will be required during the deployment of the vaccine.
It has certainly been a very close scrutiny conducted by the expert working group in terms of the question you have asked, Tom. So, Sir Munir, would you like to highlight the aspects you have been poring over?
Sure. As part of the assessment of the vaccine, we look at the quality, which includes the stability. And it does need to be stored at low temperature, at minus 70 degrees at least. But we know that once it's taken out, it can be stable between 2 to 8 degrees centigrade to allow for deployment in the vaccination sites. And that information is being shared with the relevant agencies, such as NHS, public health bodies, so that they can actually sort out the deployment model and make sure that the stability of the vaccine is maintained.
It's critically important. Thank you for raising this key issue. Our next question comes from Jasmine Ralston from the Health Service Journal. Good morning.
Good morning, thank you. A few from me. The vaccine has been approved by the MHRA with conditions. What are they? How should Trust decide which frontline staff have priority for vaccination? And how will you reassure NHS staff who are concerned that the vaccine may not be safe? And finally, will NHS staff be allowed to opt out of having the vaccination without penalty?
Thank you. The first question relates to the conditions, which, as you can imagine, are very strict and rigorous, mainly around the quality areas that we've just been exploring that need to be to the very highest standards. The second area will be around the vigilance, the monitoring of all the safety aspects, particularly, as Professor Lim has said, because so many people will want to have this vaccine. And the third area, we will have close control over the information that is provided to healthcare professionals and to the public, so that in having that very clear and very precise information, everyone can be confident the vaccine is going to reach them in the best possible way. So those are three main areas, but obviously the extent of the controls of the MHRA are very broad, in line with international guidance around good laboratory practice, good clinical practice, and good manufacturing practice. We will be watching very closely that all those requirements and conditions are complied with. Public can be confident of that. Perhaps I can turn to Professor Lim for some of the aspects you've raised, and particularly as NHS staff will need to have that confidence too.
Thank you. The JCVI has advised that there are certain frontline healthcare and social care workers who should be offered higher priority. And these are based around their own personal risk of coming to harm or having severe illness from COVID-19. Secondly, the amount of exposure that they have to people who have COVID-19 infection themselves, and thirdly, the amount of interaction they have with different people who are vulnerable and might acquire COVID-19. So we have set out some principles on how to prioritize different healthcare workers and use those when deployment of the vaccine is indicated. In terms of whether it should be voluntary or compulsory, at the moment there is no suggestion that the offer of vaccination should be compulsorily taken up. It is always an offer of vaccination, and whether somebody wants to have a vaccine or not, whether they're in the NHS or not, is at the moment a voluntary thing. But JCVI is not a policy-making body. Policy is made by ministers.
The clear and helpful information that will be provided will enable the conversations to go on an individual level so that anyone who has any questions can have them clearly and thoroughly answered. So, Munir, yes, please do.
Maybe I can add something about safety. The trials had about 40,000 individuals, and half of those received the vaccine and half received the placebo. From the data that's been provided, most of the adverse effects were mild and short-lasting, usually lasting for a day or two, similar to the kind of effects you get after any other vaccine. So that is really important to note. We haven't identified any serious adverse reactions throughout the trial program, but it is important to continually monitor the safety of this, and the MHRA has a very proactive vigilance strategy to be able to monitor the safety. Prominent amongst that is a yellow card system, which anybody can report on, including members of the public, but also the active recall system that the MHRA is going to launch, which will ask members to be able to join and look at what's happening with the vaccine and whether they're developing any kind of side effects.
It's all well prepared and we're ready to roll into action now. I think that completes all our questions. Thank you to all the journalists who've joined this morning. I'll ask my colleagues if you have any final remarks. Professor Lim?
Yes, I'd like to thank everybody who's been involved in helping JCVI come to its advice. I'd like to stress that we have so far advised how the vaccine might be used in the first phase of the program. We haven't yet decided how the vaccine might be used in subsequent phases of the program, and we will be monitoring all the new emerging data, including data coming out from phase 1 of the program, in order to make our further decisions.
Thank you, that's really helpful. So, Munir, any concluding remarks?
Thank you. I think that we are in the midst of a once-in-a-century pandemic, and I think this is a historic moment. The UK is now one step closer to providing a safe and effective vaccine to help in the fight against COVID-19, a virus that has affected each and every one of us in some way, and this will help to save lives. Thank you.
I would simply like to conclude by reiterating that this vaccine, produced and developed by Pfizer-BioNTech, meets rigorous high standards of safety, of effectiveness, and of quality. The public's safety has always been at the forefront of our minds. Safety is our watchword, and it will always continue to be so. Thank you. We can now conclude this briefing.
Well, a very sober tone at that briefing by the experts responsible for approving the use of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine in this country. In case you're wondering, speaking were Dr. June Raine. She's the Chief Executive of the MHRA. She was chairing the conference. The MHRA is the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, the agency that gave approval. Also with her were Professor Sir Munir Pierre Mohammed, he's the chair of the Commission on Human Medicine Expert Working Group, and Professor Wei Shen Lim, who's the chair of the government's Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation. The main messages coming out of that was that full immunity for those people taking the Pfizer vaccine will come 7 days after the second dose, that the priority in terms of giving out the drug will be related to those people who are most at risk, starting with care homes, that the risk of COVID having serious consequences is very much age-related, we were told. Well, let's get the analysis now of our science correspondent, Thomas Moore, who I have to say, Thomas, we were expecting you to ask a question.
Yes, the way that those questions are divvied out is determined by the Department of Health. But I think what we heard there from the MHRA and the other experts was that this has been a very sober assessment, which started all the way back in June. And they've been doing what's called a rolling review, looking at the data as it came in from the clinical trials. And that is why, even when Pfizer submitted its final batch of data on the 30th of November, they were able to turn this around extremely quickly, the first regulatory authority around the world to do so. But they say no corners have been cut, and they emphasize that time and time again. They are very aware that there is this concern of some people, vaccine hesitancy, but they do need people to come forward. What they're saying is that the company was able to run overlapping clinical trials to speed up the development. And then when data did reach the MHRA, they too were able to streamline their processes. And that is why we have a decision so quickly on the first vaccine against COVID.
Thomas, I'm just looking now at the list that's been released of those who'll be offered the vaccination. Top priority, residents in care homes for their older adults and their carers. Second, all those 80 years of age and over, and frontline health and social care workers. Third, the over 75s. Four, the over 70s and clinically extremely vulnerable individuals. 5, all those over 65. 6, all individuals aged 16 to 64 years with underlying health conditions, which put them at higher risk of serious disease and mortality. 7, all those 60 years or over. 8, all those 55 or over. And finally, all those 50 or over. Thomas, looking at the number of doses of the vaccine that the UK has access to, how long do you think it will be working through that programme, and who are going to be getting the first batch of this Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine?
The calculation for the number of people most at risk is around 30 million. Now, we have enough doses of the Pfizer vaccine to immunise 20 million of those. Of course, we have enough for another 3.5 of the Moderna vaccine, which is also being reviewed by the MHRA and probably is only a few days behind. So we're making a big dent in the number of people who are most at risk of being hospitalised and of dying from COVID. Now, it makes complete sense to start with care homes, because not only are those likely to be the eldest, they're also in an institution where, of course, we know from the first and second waves of this pandemic, the virus can spread extremely rapidly. And that is the reason that care workers are also being given priority, because they, of course, can spread the virus from room to room. It makes complete sense. There had been some speculation that perhaps because of the very specific low temperatures required by this vaccine to ensure that it remains active, that it might be kept in hospitals, and that perhaps healthcare workers would jump the queue, go to the very top, so they too could be protected first. But they remain in the second batch of people likely to have it. But we did hear from the vaccination advisor there, Professor Lim, that that there will be some flexibility in these groups. And that if there is a problem locally with the distribution of the vaccine, for whatever reason, local groups will have the authority to change that order and make sure the vaccine is being used as swiftly as possible.
Thomas, I suppose there'll be some controversy about people who need care who are not in the elderly group, because we have seen disproportionately high incidence of COVID infection and deaths amongst that group. And yet, my reading of this is that they are quite low down in the priorities list. They're at number 6.
Yeah, certainly there has been a debate over this, whether if somebody is a healthy 66-year-old, should they really be given priority over somebody who's 59 but has an underlying health condition? Well, of course, it is very difficult, and they've decided to keep this as simple as possible and just go for age, because they believe that is overwhelmingly the greatest risk factor for a serious outcome from COVID-19. It is simply about making things as easy and as straightforward. But you're right, at the lower end of the age bands, there will be some debate. But again, GPs will still have the flexibility if there is a strong personal case for somebody they believe is most at risk from COVID-19 who doesn't currently fit into one of the upper bands for priority. They will be able to give that vaccine to them.
Finally, Thomas, this question was asked, but what's your assessment? We in this country are the first people to approve the use of this Pfizer vaccine ahead of the United States, ahead of the European Union. Is there any risk that we're jumping the gun?
I don't think so, because they have been looking at this data since June. They've been going through it methodically since then and being ultra cautious. I believe that they are maintaining the very high standards they always work to. 40,000 people have had this vaccine. There have been no serious side effects they have noted. And the regulatory authority will continue to monitor this vaccine as it is rolled out to more people in case there is something that they need to be aware of, a rarer side effect that hasn't yet cropped up. And there is a well-practiced yellow card reporting system, it's called. It's available to all health workers. If they see any side effect with any medicine, even one that's been used for many years, that there is a way for them to get that information back to the regulatory authorities very swiftly. And of course, there will always be this uncertainty. Was that side effect due to the vaccine or simply a random event? But with this yellow card reporting system, they will be able to spot trends. And that is the important thing here. If they do see that there is something to be concerned with, they can react extremely swiftly. But at the moment, there is no cause for concern over this vaccine safety. We know that it is effective, 95% effective, and ultimately that is what people should consider when they're invited to come forward. This is a vaccine that saves lives. It can help to end this pandemic. This really is the beginning of the end.
Thomas Moore, thank you very much indeed. And of course, more from our health correspondent throughout the day here on Sky News. Well, joining me now is Professor Callum Semple. He is an expert in outbreak medicine at the University of Liverpool and a member of SAGE, the group of scientists that advises the government. But he is speaking to us in a personal capacity, giving us his personal opinion of this. And just want to ask you, do you agree with that assessment there, that this is the beginning of the end of this coronavirus outbreak, certainly in the UK?
For sure, this is the light at the end of the tunnel we've all been waiting for. And the prioritisation makes good sense. One of the good things we have in Britain is we've got a consolidated National Health Service and a consolidated research service, which has allowed us to identify age as being the biggest determinant of severe disease, and then clearly identify the risk groups who are most likely to benefit from early vaccination.
I want to ask you this question because it's already trending on social media in the UK, thalidomide on Twitter. I mean, what do you say to the anti-vaxxers, the people who say, look, this is going to be dangerous or a risk to public health having a vaccination programme?
They're just plain wrong. These are the same people that are saying that there's microchips in the vaccine and that somehow it's going to be used to track people, yet they're happy to carry a mobile phone that gives their location away all the time. It is the lunatic fringe.
And as far as the testing which the MHRA has gone through, would it be fair to say that standards now are much greater than they were, in the 1960s, if we want to use that example?
Standards are high, but it needs to be understood that nothing was rushed about development of this vaccine. The reason the trials could be done so quickly was because there were very many cases of COVID in the community, both in the UK and Brazil, where trials were done, which meant that trials could recruit very quickly and also look for side effects very quickly in these populations. So nothing has been cut in the way of developing of the vaccination and testing it in the community. And then that data was passed over to the regulators who've been working night and day to scrutinise the data with the utmost care.
How does a vaccine program work? Because obviously there's protecting the individual, but as I understand it, there's also a process which basically starts excluding viruses from the community.
When you get widespread vaccination, and this is the only way you do develop community immunity or herd immunity, when a substantial part of the population is vaccinated, the virus itself can't find new people that are susceptible to be infected. But the important thing about the Pfizer vaccine, which we're talking about today, is that it is such a good protection for people of all ages that even without widespread community immunity, it will protect vulnerable individuals. And it's generating an immune response in vulnerable individuals. So it's well worth pushing it out hard and fast into the population most at risk.
Am I right in thinking that the Pfizer vaccine is going to be more expensive than the AstraZeneca vaccine, both in terms of sourcing it from the pharmaceutical companies and also the processes which are needed for delivery of the vaccine?
I'm lucky to say that I'm at the other end of the process, at the clinical side and the bedside. I've got no knowledge of the commercial realities of this process.
But, I mean, would it be fair to say, from what we know so far, that the Pfizer vaccine is better than the AstraZeneca vaccine?
I don't think that comparisons can be made on the basis of cost in that same way. We do know that the Oxford vaccine has got different characteristics, allowing it to be distributed without the same cold chain requirements. And we do know that the nature of the Oxford vaccine being started with public funding and being developed, I believe, at a less commercial basis, essentially for public good, means that it will likely be provided at a lower cost.
Now, how will, given the clinical needs of the drug, we've all heard about it having to be frozen at very low temperatures before it's used. How do you envisage this program of inoculation is going to roll out?
Well, my understanding is that, in fact, for the last 5 days, it can be maintained at a higher temperature, albeit still cold. So that gets round most of the logistic challenges. And Britain is certainly well distributed. You can get a parcel next day from the internet. It'll be quite easy to get the virus around the country in a cold chain. We have got a well-developed cold chain, and NHS and social care providers have been planning for this event for a number of weeks. So I have every confidence that it will be achieved.
Would this be a drug, because of the scientific needs, that could be dispensed through GP surgeries and even through pharmacies?
I think we have to wait to see exactly what the logistics are going to be. At present, it's going to depend on organisations with greater centralised infrastructure. So it'll be the hospitals and distributors into larger care homes. But I'm sure in time we will have capacity to give these medicines through primary care. And that is where the AstraZeneca product appears to have an advantage, in that it may be more practical for primary care delivery and community delivery.
Now, what is the timeline for this? I mean, I ask that because obviously before then, we've got the move into tiers and apparently crowded shopping centres today. We've then got the easing up over Christmas with most people won't have been vaccinated by then. So presumably all that sort of behaviour poses a risk. But on the scientific availability of this drug in this country, when can we say, yeah, we should have enough people vaccinated so it'll be a return to life as normal, or will it be a return to life as normal?
Well, I've been polishing my crystal ball, and it's just not possible to be accurate about this in any way. I would still say, and most people that I speak to would say, that we're looking to the spring for when things should be a lot better. We'll have the advantage of good weather. That allows the social behaviour for people to socialise outside rather than inside in poorly ventilated environments. So really, we have to be focusing still on social distancing, hand washing and wearing masks right through, I would say, till mid-March, Easter time. The vaccine is going to protect the most vulnerable and elderly people in our society, those with complex diseases. But for the 30-year-olds and 40-year-olds, they're still going to catch it unless they take heed of the precautions. And many of them will go on to suffer severe illness and long COVID. So just because we've got a vaccine that's protecting the most vulnerable, there's still a lot of people out there that are not going to be getting the vaccine until sometime later in the year. So it's back to this washing your hands, wearing the face mask, and being sensible about the social distancing.
Professor Callum Semple, thank you very much indeed for that advice. You're watching Sky News. Coming up, we're going to be live in Mainz in Germany, where the biotech company BioNTech will be holding a live news conference on today's approval of their vaccine for use in the UK.